everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report, Thursday's edition. And folks, we have a very special show for you today. We have our regular Thursday guest, American Vision's Gary Demar, who always adds insightful color commentary to the topics of the day. And we also have a special guest with you today, Jeannie Marie Thrower. Jeannie's the Chief Executive Officer of Supplier Development Systems and is a strong advocate for the subject we're going to spend most of the show on today, which is the Convention of States. Jeannie Thrower, welcome to the Schaftlein Report. Gary, welcome back to Schaftlein Report. Glad to have you both here today.
Thank you.
Always good to be with you.
Hey, Jeannie, since you're new to the show, Jeannie, give our audience a little bit of your background and how you got involved with Convention of States as a veteran and as a business owner.
Right. Thank you for having me. So I am a small business owner. I've had my company since 2006 in the automotive industry, and I'm women-owned, veteran-owned, and really just seeing what's happening in our country. I travel all over the world dealing with global supply chains. I'm in countries that do have socialism and are restrictive to people's rights, and I know what it looks like. So I started seeing that occurring in our country with the media, certain things that are going on with this past election and what's going on now. And basically, in a nutshell, I wanted to get involved and do something that really had an impact. And that's how I found, and through research and through some different groups, I found the Convention of States.
So, Jeannie, talk to me about exactly, and for our audience who may not be familiar, explain exactly what Convention of States is and how it can benefit ordinary citizens in the country, and what's the relationship between that and Congress?
Yeah, right. So in Article 5 of the Constitution, our founding fathers created a vehicle or a method for us to take back control if Congress became too big or too corrupt. And that's in Article 5 of the Constitution. And what it does, there's a section in there that gives the states the power to be able to make amendments to the Constitution and basically bypass Washington, D.C. or the federal side of things. And so the top three things that our Convention of States, you have to have all states have to agree. So you have to have 34 states. We have 15 right now that have a Convention of State. So there's 19 more that are in legislation around the country. And the main objective that we have is all states have to agree on the same topic. So we can't be like, this state wants to do this and this state wants to do that. So
it can't be a blue state, red state issue. It's got to be a consensus.
Well, we have to all of the states, whether they're a blue or a red state, doesn't matter. If you have a Convention of States, you all have to agree on the top three things, which are term limits, stopping federal overreach, and fiscal responsibility. So those are our three pillars that the Convention of States is founded, and the foundation is on those three. Because if we had 10 items, then trying to get all the states together and agree on 10 things. So we all said, what are the top three things that we really can do and we can enact change in Congress? And those are term limits, stopping federal overreach, and fiscal responsibility. And I think whether you talk to a Democrat or a Republican and you say those three topics, even people that are liberal are like, yeah, I think there need to have term limits. Yeah, I think there is corruption in D.C. So I think it's a common ground for both parties to be able to, especially citizens. And this Convention of States is about citizens. It's a citizens-based grassroots organization, and it's about the people. And it is down to the local level and making sure that we're getting with our legislators and our states to help them to maintain our Convention of States or to help them get a Convention of States. Once we get 34 states, then we can go to D.C. and say, it really doesn't matter what you guys want to do. We're doing this. We're going to enact term limits on you. And per the Constitution, we have the right to do that.
Gary, you and I have briefly touched on this subject before, and judging how well I know you and your political views, it sounds like what Jeannie is describing is right down your political alley. Your thoughts on Convention of States and parts of it you may agree or disagree with.
Well, she's right. In fact, we have to remember that the Constitution of the United States, the actual creation of our national government, was created by the states, and it was the states that sent representatives to Philadelphia in order to create a new government, because the Articles of Confederation weren't strong enough on certain issues. And I'll bring up kind of a warning based upon what happened a little later. And it was Patrick Henry who, instead of we the people of the United States, wanted to be we the states. He really wanted the Constitution of the United States to remain that the states were the ones that created the national government, and it would be the states that would be the ones that could change the direction of the national government and its propositions when it got out of hand based upon Article 5. So yes, this is right on the money. Mark Levin, of course, has been talking about this for quite some time. Keep something in mind, however, that when the states sent their representatives to Philadelphia in order to fix the Articles of Confederation, their job was to fix the Articles of Confederation, not start a brand new governmental procedure, which is our United States Constitution. So this would have to be defined in such a way that if this didn't work out, that it would be disbanded, because we wouldn't want representatives going there and completely changing the Constitution once they got there. So there would have to be some safeguards built into this, because Jeannie, you, and I, we don't trust politicians. They say one thing and they do other things, and so there have to be some really good restraints on this particular process.
Right.
Jeannie, is it predominantly Republicans, independents driving this motion for convention of states, and are there even some Democrats involved in the process?
I would say, honestly, from my experience so far, I would say it's more a moderates or Republican is a little bit stronger on that side of things. But we definitely have Democrats that are in the organization, and it seems like we're getting even more now because of things that are going on at the border. Just even some of the Democrats, I think that voted for the current administration are having some buyer's remorse. And they're seeing that, maybe things weren't that bad before. And, again, when I talk to people about the Convention of States, I'm like, forget about the party. Forget about what party you're for. Do you think we need term limits? And for everybody, 100% says yes. I'm like, okay, well then join us.
Yeah. And Jeannie, is the actions of the federal government right now through things like H.R. 1, trying to federalize elections, Democrats at least in the House, pushing for D.C. statehood, no controls whatsoever down at the southern border, long standing, you're not going to get any support from congressmen or senators on this because they don't want term limits. And then the fiscal responsibility, which seems totally out of control. It would seem like in the current environment, Jeannie and Gary follow after Jeannie's comments, that this would be a ripe environment to move forward under this Convention of States theory.
I believe for everything that I've seen on my own research, just, being a small business owner, even if you just take out, even what party you're from, I believe this is a real solution to the problem that we have in Washington, D.C. And the problem we have in D.C. is across the board. It's Republicans and Democrats. There's just corruption. It's running rampant. And the only way to get that under control is from the people and the state, and getting these 34 states to call a convention and to enact these three issues.
Gary?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting thing happening right now, and that is governors are finally standing up to the federal government. And here in Georgia, we talked about this for a long time over this new election law that's been taking place. And Mark, you and I were really critical of Brian Kemp, back when when we were having this special election.
Yeah.
But he has stood up to the
yes, he has.
To the corporate sponsors and so forth on this law. And there are other states across the United States, governors that are saying no to this vaccine passport. that's a very good sign. And this is going to have to come from the states. So each state is going to have to petition their legislature in order to, to push this through. This can't just come from the people. The state itself, each state is going to have to make the decision that they want to do this, and 34 states would have to do it. And I don't know what the numbers are, but I think the Republicans control many more state legislatures than the Democrats do.
They do. That's
They
right.
do. They do. And I think the states are looking at what's happened over the last year and said, hold on a second, we have the power. We have the power to, take care of our elections and, voter ID and all this other stuff. And I believe even in Pennsylvania, there was an article that came out in Epic Times in Pennsylvania. They took 21,000 dead voters off the rolls because the lawsuit was finally won. And we're like, okay, so those 21,000 voters, they were dead, but did they vote in the 2020 election? I mean, those are the types of things that states are starting to uncover now that they've had time to dig in, and they are, taking back their power, which is good. And so the Convention of States has a really, really good shot across the country in being enacted.
Jeannie, what are the risks? And Gary, I want you sort of alluded to this earlier. What are the risks if we get 34 states that come together and we have a convention? Is it possible more things could change beyond those three initiatives that you're speaking about, Jeannie? Because I've heard talk show host Mark Levin talk about it many times, the benefits, but he's also alluded to there are some risks involved too. Can you comment on?
Right. I mean, they've talked about the Runaway Convention where we've got these three topics, these three objectives that we all have to agree on. The way I view it is, and they said that you can get a runaway convention and all of a sudden you start doing other things and start to change the Constitution. I mean, you have to still get those 34 states to all line up on just the three topics, which isn't easy.
Right.
So I think that it's a huge uphill battle for them to be able to start going and saying, okay, now we're going to get all 34 states to change another law. So it's a pretty difficult thing to do. The alternative is the situation we have now. So, there's a little bit of a risk, I guess, if you can get all 34 states to plow through a lot of other legislation, but you have to get all 34 states to agree. It has to be ratified by 38 states. And
that's right. That's the 2/3 majority required, Jeannie?
Yeah, right. And then look at the situation we're in now. I mean, it's not going to get any better. The corruption's not going to stop. And I believe this is the only choice that we really have as a country to get some controls back in place before it's really too late. So to me, it's worth the risk.
Gary, you also had alluded to a lot of the benefits, but you also urged some caution in some of the previous discussions we've had relative to this subject.
Well, again, this would really have to be nailed down very specifically as to what you're going to accomplish, and even to put in the cautionary notice that any other point cannot be dealt with at this particular convention. You want to bring it up another time, you may have to go through the whole process again. This would have to be very clear, and the courts would have to be clear on this as well. It'd be great to get some adjudication on this, from some top lawyer, maybe lawyers from the Supreme Court itself, that this would have to be a very specifically designed, convention. And the other question is, each state is going to pick its representatives to go there, and that's something we need to be aware of as well. I'd love to be able to go from Georgia, but I'm probably not going to be picked to go. So the people who actually go are extremely important, and also keep in mind that, look, the states want to protect their interests, and right now the interests of the states are simply the federal government gives them money.
That's right.
They first off they take the money from us.
Right.
Jeannie knows this. You have your own business. You know how much money the federal government takes, and then they turn around and say, "Oh, look how much money we're going to give back to you." Well, it's never as much as they've taken. So states depend on this federal money coming in, and it's oftentimes the carrot and the stick that's used to keep the states in line. And so there are all these factors in here. I'm with Jeannie on this. I think we're the risks are there, but if we were very specific on what on dealing with these risks, I think that's important. I'd love to see them get term limits. I think these congressmen, these senators, they have their own private pensions, their own private medical care. They're constantly getting themselves rich over us. I mean, Joe Biden, I think his last tax return he reported $19 million in income. Where's he getting this money? What does he do in order to get this money? Well, he goes and he speaks, and people pay him $500,000 or $1 million to speak. Look, Joe Biden doesn't have anything interesting to say. It's always a power thing. We're going to give you this money for a speaking engagement. We want something in return. So we are in a mess, and we have got to try to do this in Congress. Jeannie's right. Congress isn't going to vote for term limits. This is something that's going to have to come from the states.
And Jeannie, just today, to sort of tie in the piece to the states, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, in light of this gun legislation, the gun edict that came out of President Biden today via executive order or pending executive orders, Greg Abbott came out today, governor of Texas, and basically saying Texas is going to be a Second Amendment sanctuary state. And I thought, wow, we're talking about this subject today. And Gary, you mentioned states taking control. Jeannie, talk about that a little bit from, not necessarily whether he's right or wrong, just the fact that the states are pushing back against Washington. And Gary, like we've talked, Governor Kemp pushing back against these corporate elites like Coca-Cola, Delta Airlines. I'd like to hear both your thoughts, on those points.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously this is kind of in line with the Convention of States, but the states are taking back their power. You can see what DeSantis is doing. He's another one too that's pretty vocal about even these vaccine passports and things like that. So, at the end of the day, the states are taking back their power, which they have the right to do. The federal government's getting way too big. The overreach is getting, bigger and more intrusive. And the states are starting to educate themselves and take back some of that power for themselves, which they should be doing. And I think you're going to see those states, also the population will increase in those states because you can't really live that well in blue states, with some of the stuff that's going on. So I think you're going to see the population grow in some of those states. I still think Georgia, in my mind, in the back of my mind, is still a red state. I just think it is. So and I know a lot of people in Georgia, and a lot of them are conservative. So. On the wokeness, I'm even looking at it myself and saying, okay, I don't want to support companies out there that are, trying to change, elections and say that you don't need a voter ID.
Yeah,
so
ridiculous.
Myself as a business owner, I'm not going to be supporting those companies as well. And I'm sure other people are too.
Gary?
I think the 60 Minutes show that CBS did on DeSantis, is showing us that the media and the Democrats in general don't like the governors taking these types of positions.
That's
Here
right.
you have, Cuomo, you got women coming out, I think 9 of them now.
10.
What happened with the nursing homes and so forth.
Yeah.
They won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. But then they go after DeSantis and manipulate the commentary that he made over all this, splicing it up in bits and pieces and so forth and taking out the more important points. They know that DeSantis is rising in the polls and is becoming a national figure. And what's going to happen with these other states, and these governors are going to say, hey, if DeSantis can do it, so can we.
So can we.
And I think that's one of the things that's been lacking among Republicans. The Democrats are always unified. Almost all their votes are right down the line. They may give a little here and there, but they calculate and they say, look, we can win without you, so you can vote this way because you're kind of in a purple state, purple district. Republicans don't support one another. And I think once we get governors out there, taking a stand, other governors are going to do the same thing. And I think that's going to be an important point in dealing with something like this convention of states.
And Jeannie, that hit job that Gary was mentioning on Ron DeSantis, I mean, last time I looked, Governor DeSantis' approval in the state of Florida is hovering around 64, 65%. And whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, most people are pretty happy with how the state of Florida, which I know is where you're based out of, is Governor DeSantis is managing, not only keeping the state open, but managing the virus distribution.
Yeah, I mean, we were pretty much back in business in July, August, practicing social distancing, wearing the masks, trying to, they still had some limited spaces in the restaurants. You try to only have maybe 25 or 50%, and that kind of eventually got. But yeah, he did it right, and it's the numbers prove that he wasn't higher in COVID outbreak cases.
Right.
And our economy is booming. I'm in the Tampa area right now, and the economy is booming, and he did a fantastic job. So.
Now, go ahead, Jeannie. Keep going.
Go ahead, Gary.
Okay.
Well, just my wife and I are taking a vacation to Florida, May 1st to the 4th to St. Augustine. We wanted to go to Charleston, South Carolina, but they've got this mask mandate. I'm not interested. So we're, and over Christmas time, of course, our whole family went down there for 2 weeks in Florida. This is, people are flowing to those states where they're going to have much more freedom, and Florida is setting the example, and it's going to empower, I think, other governors in other states to go along with DeSantis, because to say, hey, look, if DeSantis can do this, and look at his popularity going up,
Yep.
we're going to do it in our state too. And this is the fear factor for Democrats. It's always been a fear factor for Democrats, that when governors, conservative governors, stand up and take on the federal government. The Democrats have been doing it all for the longest time. Now in California, they don't care about immigration laws. They flaunt their state's rights on immigration.
Yep.
They have sanctuary cities and so forth, legalizing marijuana and so forth over against federal regulations. The federal government doesn't do anything to them. It's time that the governors in conservative states stand up based upon their 9th and 10th Amendment rights and take that power and authority back.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Gary and Jeannie, both on that subject. And we have seen conservative red state governors, and it's no accident. Look where the people are moving. I mean, later in the show, we're going to talk a little bit about Census, and the states that are actually picking up congressional seats are generally red states, and the ones that are losing them are blue states. Like, New York may lose 2 congressional seats. And Gary, just like we've talked on the taxation issue, Jeannie, you're experiencing it in Florida. Real estate values are really moving up in the state of Florida because a lot of people from high-tax states are moving to the state of Florida. What say you about the effect on the citizens of Florida from, frankly, a lot of Northeasterners moving down saying, I've had it with these liberal governors?
Yeah. I mean, our message to pretty much everybody that comes to Florida is just don't New York our Florida. So you can come and have fun and have a good life here, but don't bring don't bring the blue politics with you, because we like being red. But I mean, at the end of the day, us remaining or getting open faster, the vaccine rollout, our numbers, everything that we've done in this state successful shows the rest of the country. They did, also Texas, I think, doing well. North Dakota, some of these other red states out there. Yep. People are moving there because they feel like, and also too with this, because everybody was on Zoom the last year and working from home, a lot of companies discovered that they can, have a certain percentage of their employees work from home and still be successful. Yep. That's still, obviously managing that is still yet to be seen. But I think that the commercial brick and mortar real estate around the country is going to really hit hard eventually. Yeah. But in Florida, it's just prices are going up.
Prices are going up, and Gary in Georgia, prices are going up there too, because even though you elected 2 Democratic senators, and we've talked about why that happened, your governor is a Republican, your state representatives are Republican, your state senate's Republican, and Georgia, as Jeannie mentioned, it may have gone blue in the Senate, but I still believe it's by a small margin, it's still a red state.
Yeah, and we know those two Senate seats, if it had been in any other state, we would have had two Republicans in there, because in Georgia, to remind people that those two senators had to get 50% of the vote plus one. They didn't. That's why we had the runoff.
Yep.
We would have had those seats. It was only in Georgia where we have that restriction. But yeah, but Jeannie made this point. Don't New York, Florida. Well, what's happened in Georgia somewhat is what the movie industry, which was tax incentives were given under Jimmy Carter, and so there's been a lot of Hollywood types moving here and bringing their leftist politics with them. And of course, we're something of a low taxation state. We're also a right to work state, and that's attracted a lot of people as well. But we have seen the shift take place. But when my wife and I first moved here in 1979, this was a deep blue state. Yeah. And then we turned it around. We're gonna have to do it again.
Let's shift subjects a little bit here. Talk about a little bit of the news of the day. And Gary, I'm going to start with you on this one. Biden's executive order on guns. I have a feeling, literally no pun intended, it's going to go over like a lead balloon. What say you relative to these new efforts by Biden related to ghost guns, and talk to our audience a little bit about some of the implications of Biden's executive order?
Who does this apply to? This is the most ridiculous type of legislation. It's just thrown out there for the left. Hey, look what I did on gun control. There isn't a single criminal in the world that cares anything about this legislation. 99.9% of gun owners are law-abiding. These laws don't apply to them either, because they don't go out and shoot anybody.
Right.
It's the criminal element is what's the problem. This law, there are already laws on, but I don't know how many different gun laws there are already.
Massive.
Guns are legislated from one end of the spectrum to the other. Evil people are going to do evil things. Not one of these particular laws are going to affect any particular criminal who wants to go out and shoot anybody. And I bet you, if this goes through, and they are executive orders, and they're not even constitutional, we're not going to see any change in the number of shootings in Chicago over the weekend.
Jeannie, I had almost the same impression. When I looked, I was reading a few articles for show prep day, trying to figure out what was in these executive orders, and frankly, outside of the ghost gun piece, I had a hard time deciphering what Biden was really talking about today. Do you have further insight for our audience on this? Because honestly, looking through, I was sort of digging, saying, all right, what's the change here? What's happening here? I don't know one person that owns a ghost gun.
Yeah, he's grasping at straws. He's doing anything he can to keep the narrative going, to keep the left happy, to keep the people that put him in power, to try to keep them happy at the highest elitist levels. And it has no substance to it. It won't do anything to change, again, what Gary's point, what the criminals are able to do. And if somebody wants to get a gun and go shoot somebody, they're still going to be able to do that. So it has no backbone to it. I'm a gun owner, and for law-abiding citizens, it won't do anything to them either. So it's really just to keep the left happy, and it's that narrative that they're trying to push to make it look like they're doing a whole lot of stuff in the first 100 days.
That's what I thought. Honestly, that mirrored my thoughts, because I'm saying, would this gun law have stopped that guy that came out and killed a prominent doctor in South Carolina today, and killed him, his wife, 2 grandkids, and 1 other person? No, it wouldn't have stopped that. Would it stop the guy that killed a couple people in Maryland the other day? No, it wouldn't have stopped. I don't know any of these laws, Gary, that are going to prevent any of these mass killings. And again, the senselessness of it, where the gunman kills someone, then they take their own life.
Yeah, look, this is all designed to piecemeal this thing. We're going to pass this law. We're going to pass this law. That's not going to solve anything. They'll say, see, we tried all this. What's really going to solve the problem is gun confiscation. That is the dream law of the left.
Yep.
Confiscate guns from law-abiding citizens, and we're going to be left with just, criminals. I mean, I forget, I don't know how many, 200 million guns out there. And I think last month was one of the biggest months
Gary,
for gun sales and background checks.
I think you're close to 300 million guns in this country.
Yeah.
I actually think so. I mean, yeah, it is sort of hypocrisy. And I concur with both of you, because at the end of the day, when societies get like this, and I had a conversation with a California-based attorney today based out of Los Angeles. He said, Mark, I've experienced the socialism. First thing they do is the media tries to censor conservatives and censor regular Americans. Then they take away your weapons, and then at that point, when you don't have your weapons and you don't have your freedom of speech, Jeannie, that's a problem in a constitutional democracy, which is where what we have here.
Yeah, and they're training the next generation, indoctrinating them with some of these, education, what they're doing with the education and trying to erase history and not teach about the Constitution. What they're doing is they're creating people who are just going to go along with it. And that's why I think the Convention of States is even more critical and important to try to get that as well, to stop it.
Yeah, I concur with you. And Gary, tie those pieces in. Again, not only is it guns, but today, not shockingly at all, we saw Joe Biden walk back the fact that now we're going to have troops continue to stay in Afghanistan beyond the May 1st date set by Donald Trump. And again, tying in foreign policy, similar to what now we have to keep troops in Afghanistan. The border, it just gets worse and worse every day. We're up to another facility of overflow migrants. 45,000 people report out today may have come into the country, since this crisis started into February.
Yeah, you think of the war in Afghanistan. I mean, is it really a war in Afghanistan? Here we've got troops. This supposed war in Afghanistan, which is longer than the two world wars combined in terms of time. And what gets me is, I grew up in the anti-war era of the 1960s, the Vietnam War. I was in the first draft where we had a lottery. My number was 278. I didn't have to go to Vietnam, and the left was against wars. Bring the troops home. Bring the troops home. Right. And yet the left is the one that's pursuing and keeping these wars going around the world, which is bankrupting us. And again, this is just like Chicago. The problem in Afghanistan is not all the people, but the problem in Afghanistan is essentially the people. And it was the same thing in other countries around the world. We have troops. And here we have Trump trying to bring the troops home from around the world. I think this is a follow the money deal. This is to keep certain constituents happy, that the money keeps flowing in order to pay for weapons.
Well, war is a business.
Yeah, and Jeannie, you're a businesswoman. You have operations. You mentioned in Alabama, you do business on a global basis. You visited socialist countries. Are you seeing characteristics here in the United States now that happen in some of these socialist countries where you do business as an international businesswoman?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's one of my largest concerns and why I've become more active to try to enact change. Censorship, just like Gary said, censorship and taking away, your Second Amendment right. Those two right there, if you look at the playbook on how to move a country into socialism, those are the first two steps. Yeah. And then right up there with it is the education, right? You're going to change the way you educate people. I mean, I was in China with some of my earlier trips to China, so they're talking about Tiananmen Square and the guy that was standing in front of the tank. You remember Tiananmen Square?
Yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah.
And they were like, I'm in a meeting, or I'm not in a meeting. It was after work, and it's like, oh yeah, Tiananmen Square, that's in Beijing, and they were like, no, you can't talk about that. And I was like, what are you talking about? And they're like, that never happened.
No,
and I'm like, it happened because I saw it on the news. It happened. And he said, and one of my business partners in China was like, Gene, you're not allowed to talk about that. We don't believe that ever happened in our country. It's been taken out of all of our history lessons. It never happened. So that's an example, right? And he was like, don't talk about it anymore. If you're heard talking about it, we'll get in trouble. So that's the kind of stuff that's happening here in America now in just record time, in the last 9 months.
Yeah.
And it's happening right before our eyes every day. And now people are even, I think, getting desensitized to it. They're like, well, I guess that's just the way it is. And, we'll take our stimulus check and just turn our guns in. So yeah, it's a serious issue. It has to be stopped.
I get a sense, and again, we're going to have a 2022 election, and by that period of time, the census will make some adjustments in House seats. But I was thinking about it today. I think Republicans have reached the tipping point. I really do, because when MLB pulled that game out of Atlanta, even Democrats now are ticked off about that. The wokeism got way out of control. And between now, if you think about this, Biden on the guns, chaos at our southern border, wokeness everywhere, cancel culture everywhere. I just have this gut feeling, and I've seen some early polling to indicate it. I think, Jeannie, as you mentioned earlier in the show, people are having some regrets. Maybe they don't regret they didn't vote for Donald Trump, but boy, they regret having Democrats in power. And Gary, we've talked about it extensively. There is no checks and balance other than President Joe Manchin and Vice President Kristen Sinema. I mean, without those two, you literally would have Democrats running wild. And my God, I mean, all the stuff we talked about that might happen if Georgia went on those 2 Senate seats, Gary, we haven't missed a beat on any of that. I think the American public is waking up to this saying, oh my God, I didn't think it was going to be this bad.
Well, here in Georgia, I mean, this has been daily news over what the Major League Baseball did. Now it's come out, and Stacey Abrams says, "Oh no, don't boycott." But the CEO of I don't know what he is at the head of Major League Baseball, the guy that made this decision. He has come out and said it was Stacey Abrams and LeBron James who encouraged him to move the All-Star game out of Atlanta. But now Stacey Abrams is coming back and saying, no, we wanted, we didn't want this to happen. She has been lying from the beginning. And again, kudos to Brian Kemp. He has stood up and says, look, she's in this thing for the money. She is getting rich as a result of this, and she is not at all for blacks in Georgia. I mean, again, going to Colorado, to Denver, to almost a near white. Was it 90% white in Denver, to leave the Atlanta area, which is about 50% black. It's just topsy-turvy. And I don't know, I would really like to get the perspective of blacks here in the Atlanta area as to what they think about all this. But the news is skewed. It's hard to really tell what they're thinking, what they really know.
There was some pushback today by African-American business owners in metro Atlanta area, in Cobb County and in I think Fulton, DeKalb counties. The stadium is in Cobb County. For folks, that's it used to be considered the outskirts. Now it's part of metro Atlanta. But there's a pushback now. African American business leaders are petitioning Major League Baseball commissioners saying, hey, change this game back to Atlanta where it was before. Now, I don't know whether he's going to do that. And did you notice, too, how Biden has backpedaled saying, well, no, we didn't tell him he had to move the game. But when you get Stacey Abrams, LeBron James, President Biden, all, and you know damn good and well he did because his interview's on tape. He may not remember it, but we've got it on tape, folks. So now all of a sudden people are saying, whoa, wait a minute. This may not have been the way to go, and maybe we need to pull this back. I mean, Jeannie, any chance that MLB is going to change their mind on this, or is this a fait accompli?
I mean, I don't think they're going to change their mind because that would make them look ridiculous.
Yeah, it would.
So, I mean, the guys that said they're going to Denver, I mean, I think that they're stuck going to Denver now. That's my personal opinion. I don't see any way politically or smoothly to transfer this back over after they disagreed with the voter ID. I guess that was the major issue. Yeah. And with MLB and also Delta and some of these other, and Coke. But I don't see any easy way for them to switch it back. Gary, I mean, that's your neck of the woods.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on this. I don't see how they do it. One of the things that's been troubling to me is where have the baseball players been on this.
Hadn't heard a peep.
Have they said anything? I haven't heard a peep out of them.
No.
It's like they've got a gag order.
This was all upper management decision. The players didn't have anything to say about this. And what's interesting about baseball, the percentage of black baseball players has gone down over the years, and what's gone up is more the Caribbean players, Dominican Republic and Puerto Rico and so forth, Central and South America. There isn't a high number of black baseball players as there were in the past. But I haven't heard a peep out of any baseball player.
This was a pure wokeism, a quick decision by Commissioner Manafort, who, by the way, is a member of Augusta National. And a lot of people are saying, well, Commissioner, if you really think it's that bad, why are you staying a member of Augusta? And, they tried doing a hit job on Augusta. I saw that on Bloomberg News and USA Today. And fortunately, the people that run that tournament basically had a one-up saying, we'll run our own tournament. We don't need any input from you. Thank you very much. Now, one closing piece here, and then I want to get your closing comments. Jeannie and Gary, crime in some of these big cities, New York, LA, Chicago, in addition to ridiculously high taxes in these cities, crime is escalating off the charts in some of these cities. Who tried to defund the police? Well, guess what? They got a pretty severe backlash against that. Your thoughts on that, and then we'll close it out with the closing comments.
Well, I think that's the reason why people are moving out in Chicago, Portland. I mean, those places have just been destroyed by bad policy, by bad politicians, by primarily, let's just face it, they're all liberal, Democrat ran cities, and they've been completely destroyed. And the market value of properties there is just plummeted. It just goes from bad to worse. And those people are people that are smart, or people that can move out, are moving out and leaving those just like war zones. Yeah. And the only thing that I thought in the back of my mind, because this administration's tied closely with China, I don't care what anybody says, they're tied to them.
Oh, absolutely.
And the only thing I think is there's a trend in China to come over to the U.S. and buy up property and buy up assets and things like that. Because that's China's way in, right? Is to come in and to buy. So guess what? If you can drop the property values in cities like Chicago and in New York that are premium areas, and all of a sudden you have Chinese money coming in and buying them up for pennies on the dollar or 50 cents on the dollar, now all of a sudden they've got more. Then they get in there and they clean up the policing, and they make it better, and all of a sudden now you've got a city though that's owned by a foreign company or a foreign country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's my kind of conspiracy theory. I think they're going to try to plummet the market and come in and buy.
Gary?
Well, China's been doing this for quite some time, especially been doing it out west, because that's their physical entree into the country because of goods coming in and so forth. And there is a large, Chinese and Asian population in California. But I think it makes a lot of sense. And plus, we haven't really talked about the border and the long-term implications of all of this. But the Democrats want to send these immigrants throughout the United States to kind of dilute the strength in red states. You go into Texas and send in migrants into Texas, and they start voting Democrat. You lose Texas, and you lose the nation.
Well, that's why the good news to report is Texas legislature. I received an email today from Dr. Hotze, who is instrumental in working with the Texas Senate and the Texas House of Representatives. Texas is moving forward with some pretty tough voter IDs, and you're going to see that's the next state that's going to be taking the aggressive stance there. And Texas is actually exploring biometric IDs, which would be great. You go through the CLEAR system if you travel. I know you know about that, Jeannie. Imagine if we had biometric IDs for voting. That'd be something else. Yeah, we got about a minute left. Jeannie, give me your closing thoughts. We generally like to try to have something positive going on. You're a business owner. I know the economy's pretty good right now. Give us some thoughts as a business owner for our audience, and how do you see things going from here in the United States?
Well, I think that, business is picking back up. A lot of these states are coming back online. Sales for our industry and automotive are spiking. And so I think, we have a lot of good opportunities out there for companies to increase revenue and to, hopefully start back up. So I think that's on a positive. On one other side comment is, please, if you are interested at all, go to the conventionofstates.com
Yes.
and sign the petition.
That's www.conventionofstates.com. Jeannie,
Yes, sir.
Jeannie, this won't be the last time you come on Schaftlein Report. Great insight today. Thank you very much for joining us. Gary, your closing thoughts. I know you have some positive things on America. You're a believer at heart.
Yeah, keep your eye on the governors. Keep an eye on what's happening in these states and how they are bucking the federalist juggernaut on keeping states in control. I think this is going to be the key to so much, and I think it's going to be an indicator of what might take place in 2022 in the election.
My closing positive comment, and Gary, I agree with you there 100%. My closing comment is headlines were today, Joe Manchin has come out unequivocally and said he will not support any changes to the filibuster. Kyrsten Sinema, senator from Arizona, pretty much mirrored his comments. I think that for right now, at least that puts what I'll deem a firewall against some of the horrific legislation passed by Pelosi in the House of Representatives. Now, will it stay that way? I don't know, but at least we have two Democratic members of Congress with a backbone who bucked their party and said, listen, the answer, just because we disagree, is not to change the rules. The answer is to get Democrats and Republicans to work together for the benefit of the American public, try to come together as the Senate used to, and try to get some bipartisan legislation out of this. Not this far left-wing stuff that Pelosi's passing. Try to, get some compromise. And Joe Biden, our president, did indicate today, when he was asked a question, he said, look, I am willing to do some compromise on that corporate tax rate. Maybe it's not 28, maybe it's something less than that. Well, President Manchin has said 25 is the max. I'm just kidding, folks, don't really mean that. But Manchin did say 25 was his max. So, and even some Democrats are saying, well, maybe we can whittle this bill doesn't need to be this big. I'm predicting tonight, folks, I think there will be some compromises on this bill. And maybe if they get that corporate tax rate low enough, you might get some Republican support. But I am optimistic, based upon two Democratic senators keeping their word, that the filibuster will remain intact despite Schumer's efforts to get rid of it. He knows better. And the economy keeps growing. Having said that, Gary, Jeannie, thank you both for joining us today. Outstanding guests as always. Folks, stay safe, get your vaccinations. A lot's going to happen over the weekend, and we will be back on Monday to share with you. Thanks for joining us, and everybody have a safe and happy, prosperous weekend. This is Mark Schaftlein. Have a good night.